Hello, 1, 2, 3, testing mic, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing mic, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our quarter-free community of practice. Very excited about our theme today. We are going to introduce you to a panel of consultants that UN Women has used to do an assessment of the data and capacity gaps related to administrative data that's being used for discrimination and inequality reporting. And then we are also going to have a number of presenters who will share with us the work that the Praia City Group is currently doing on administrative data in this field. And then also advances with regards to SDG 16 and its measurement, as well as representation in government and other institutions. So I see people are still joining. So while we wait for everyone, I'm going to ask our panelists to just open their screens so that we can introduce them. So Samuel, you are already in the room. Samuel Kilojui worked on the assessment in West and Central Africa. Welcome, Samuel.
Good morning, Mr.
Good
Elizabeth.
morning.
Yeah, good morning to all participants.
Yes, you're most welcome. Any other panelists in the room already?
Yes, good morning, Isabel.
Good morning, Buaza.
morning.
Bushkar, he was responsible for the assessment in North Africa. Welcome, Buaza.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be with you today for this interesting subject. Thank you.
Great.
Good morning,
Nancy?
Nancy. Yes.
Oh, you opened your camera. Great. Please, you can also introduce yourself.
Good morning to all. I'm Nancy Odhiambo. I covered the Southern Africa region. Good morning to all, and hope we have a great discussion. Thank you.
Yes, and I also just want to add, Nancy was responsible for the integrated report, which then summarized at a high level all the different sub-regions that were covered. We covered 5 sub-regions in the study. The first one was North Africa. We've seen Buaza introduced himself. Then we covered West and Central Africa. And then East Africa was done by Josiah. Josiah, are you in the room? If you can please open your camera. And then we'd also combined the 2 Lusophone countries, primarily because of the language issues. So Maimuna Ibrahimu covered Mozambique and Cabo Verde. And so our study that is going to form the focus of our first panel discussion this morning was done in support of the work of the Praia City Group. And we specifically looked at what are the specific data and capacity gaps related to administrative data that measures inequality and discrimination. And so we've completed the study. It will very soon be online. And our consultants are now going to share with us a little bit what they've done. and the findings they had. Then our panel discussion is going to be followed by presentations from a consultant that's currently working for the Praia City Group and developing a module that provide guidance on administrative data in this field. And this is also then going to follow by 2 presentations by UNDP, looking at representation in all kinds of institutions, as well as the more recent report that they've produced on SDG 16. So without much ado, I see Maimuna has joined us as well. Maimuna, if you can please open your camera. Josiah has joined as well. Let's just get all our panelists in the room and then we can start with the group discussion.
Let me check.
Maimuna, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Isabella.
Please introduce yourself. Josiah, we are busy with panel introductions.
Good
Over to
morning,
you, Maimuna.
everyone. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Maimuna Ibrahimu from Mozambique. I'm a gender studies specialist, and I have produced a report for Mozambique and Cape Verde. So I'm glad to be here to share with you the results. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Maimuna. Josiah, can you perhaps also just open your camera?
Hi, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you well. If you can please introduce yourself.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Josiah Mukoya. I'm a labor economist based in Nairobi, Kenya. My region of assessment was Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Djibouti. So I'll be sharing my key findings for that. Thank you very much and good to see everyone.
Great. Welcome to everyone. Again, we've started with introductions of the panel. Our panelists are not going to do PowerPoints. We are going to have a discussion format, and that's then going to be followed by the UNDP colleagues and their consultant and the PowerPoint presentations that they are planning to do. So welcome everyone in the room. I see Josiah, your camera is also open. Maybe it's good for you to also, since this was a partnership with Praia City Group, if you can also introduce yourself, even though you will follow the panel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is José Eduardo Garcia. I'm the coordinator of the secretariat here in Cabo Verde of the Praia Group.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So without much further ado, we are going to proceed with this community of practice meeting. Our first question is actually addressed to Nancy. And as you may remember, she compiled the Southern Africa report, but she also did a consolidation of all the regional reports to provide us with a report on Africa. So Nancy, your question is, what were the most important cross-cutting issues related to this type of data that were found in all sub-regions that were included in the study? And then after that, if you can also just share with us a few examples of good practices that you picked up in Southern Africa. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Isabella, and thank you for the question. So in the process of consolidating the report, I was able to identify the various challenges that is affecting the admin data access and use in the continent. However, I will allude to two. I'll allude to coordination and resources. So you find that with coordination, what I found is that there are so many institutions, like organization players in the admin data ecosystem on discrimination and equality. However, you find that most of these institutions, as stakeholders involved, they work in silos. So you find that the production is done, when data production is done, data is loaded, data is analyzed, without sometimes even the NSOs who are the ones who are mandated to do this even involved. So what I found that these ones normally creates the gaps, the data gaps that maybe we have on that data. It can also sometimes leads to the standardization problems that we have, and also the collaboration challenges that we have with the administrative data on discrimination and equality. Another challenge that I got that cuts across is on resources. I found that most governments in the region, they do not have enough budget that they can allocate to these institutions that are involved in admit data processes. So you find, like, for example, here I'm alluding mostly to the NSO. So you find that these organizations now, they have to rely on donor support in most instances. Without this enough resources, it spills over to the human resource challenges. So without that, you find that without the enough resources, there's also the problem of human resource. And this one also goes on, spills over to the, if you don't have the resources, you cannot be able to hire and retain good personnel. You cannot be able to upskill, and also you can also be able to provide them with the necessary infrastructure that they need to do their work. So these are some of the two challenges that I found that were cutting across most of the countries that were part of this study. So when it comes to best practices, I'll highlight two also. I highlight that despite these challenges, the countries in the region has to upskill the people involved, so that through on how to produce this data, on how to analyze this data, even on how to disseminate this data. They've even gone far and even collaborating with international organizations. So that is also something that, like, organizations and institutions, those are some of the things that I picked on in training. And then another thing that I picked on is that they're trying to put in place centralized systems that can help with the access of this type of administrative data in the region, and also coming up with systems that can help with linking other systems that are also used to store or collect those admin data sets in the region. Apart from that, the last one that I'll speak to was, like, they're also trying to come up with frameworks, even though their frameworks are there in general, but they're trying to come up now with the frameworks and models that they can use to share data amongst the institutions that are involved with the administrative data production on discrimination and equality. So those are some of the best practices that I was able to pick from the region. Thank you, and over to you.
Thanks, Nancy, for sharing that. We are going to take a bit of a deep dive into the studies that were done in North Africa, Lusophone countries, West and Central Africa, and East Africa. So I'm now going to ask Buaza to specifically share with us some of his most important observations, the gaps that he identified in that sub-region, as well as the good practices. Over to you, Buaza.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Thank you very much, Nancy, for the presentation. In addition to what mentioned Nancy as general main finding for all the sub-regions, for the North Africa, which consists of the three countries, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, as general overview, we can say that in concerning the administrative data system concerning of this subject of non-discrimination and equality, we identified that they have, for some countries, they have long experience and long practice in using administrative data in general for specific sector, and also for some areas related to our study. That's one issue, with some differences, of course, between the countries, because this difference is impacted because of the nature of the national statistical system in each country. For some countries, we have more decentralized national statistical system. That means only the National Statistical Office who is in charge of collecting, producing, and disseminating all the data, including the administrative data. And other countries, they have more decentralized system. That means the National Statistical Office also is the main producer of this kind of data, but also has play a main role of coordinating with other institutions that are also involved in producing this kind of data by following the statistical law. That's the difference between the levels or the types of national statistical system that impact the level of development of administrative data system in this country, which impact a lot the availability of this kind of data in each country. That's as general overview. But we identified that many data are available. In some countries, we have potential data, but not yet used, but already available and can be used in the future. The main specificity, but the other side, we can mention some specific things for this sub-region. That's these types of subjects represents some sensitivity for some countries or for some institutions. That's which impacts a little bit the sharing and the availability of this data for all the users. That's the main issue that we can identify. As the main finding for relating to this type of data in this sub-region, we can say that the existence of administrative data related to non-discrimination and equality, but concerning or across several sectors in health, education, justice, population, especially in all in most of the country, with the difference between the level of the availability in each country. That's the very, very important things. But in other side, as gaps, we can say that the absence of disaggregate or detailed data concerning non-discrimination and equality, especially detailed data concerning disaggregation by disability status, by socio-economic status, something like that. Also limited there is some limitation on the availability of statistical products that can be used by user, for example, publication or database that can be accessed directly by user concerning this subject. Other issue, as mentioned by Nancy, based on these sensitivities issue is the problem of coordination between institutions, especially the coordination between National Statistical Office and other sectoral institutions. That's the main finding that we can say for this sub-region. But in the other side, as a good practice, as I mentioned in the beginning, some countries are more developed. They have some administrative data system more developed because of their decentralized statistical system. For example, for Morocco, they have some institutions, they have a lot of experience in producing and disseminating this kind of data, at least for some aspects. For example, the equality or gender data. I can mention here the National Statistical Office of Morocco, High Commission of Planning, and also other institutions, sectoral, is in charge of analyzing these types of area, like the National Observatory of Human Development. Also, they have a lot of data available and also disseminated via specific publication, general database, but also specific publication. I can mention here as best practice, women's in figures in Morocco, when we can find a lot of data concerning the equality, gender equality, especially collected via administrative source. That's what I can see for this sub-region, and I am here for any question that you have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bouaza. Much appreciated. And yes, it's always very interesting to learn about experiences from, for example, Morocco, who is really one of the leading agencies on the continent in areas of gender statistics and other statistical themes of concern. So thanks a lot. Let's now go to Josiah. Josiah covered East Africa. Josiah, over to you. What were your main impressions of the gaps as well as best practices that you identified in East Africa?
Thank you so much. Confirm, please, you can hear me.
We can hear you well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, indeed, for East Africa, quite a number of things I did observe. One of it that I wanted to underscore is the very good existence of treaties, international local strategies, for example, Kenya Vision 2030, Uganda Constitution, and various national policies such as National Equal Opportunities Policy, for instance, that really back up this type of, data in administrative data on discrimination and inequality. Of course, we know that this is important, to just shape how this happens in these countries as coordinated by the national statistics offices. So that I found to be really a good thing, cutting across all the 5 countries. But into specific findings in terms of gaps, one of the things that was really standing out for all 5 countries, I'll say, is the space, in itself, equipment and tools. As basic as it sounds, many of, all these countries did say that, this was a big gap. Limited stakeholder awareness on international data standards, for instance, was also another one, because this is something that requires a lot of standardization. This didn't seem to exist. General ICT infrastructure was also mentioned to be very weak. Reporting mechanisms, I could see some elements of data disaggregation by gender, equity and things like those, but, this was not really looking systematic. They also mentioned the lack of clear guidelines, and I know this is why this work is being done, to kind of be able to provide some important, guidelines that could shape, this information going forward. So protocols really do not exist, or specific guidelines around administrative data on discrimination and inequality. They also mentioned inconsistent data, socioeconomic and ethnic data was also limiting or unavailable at all, for this. When I looked at disability data, this was also incomplete, in many of the countries. Dissemination of this information was also limiting, access of it as well. Sector-specific disparities existed, for example, in agriculture, land ownership, for example, education schools, although this was, quite robust for the case of Kenya, for instance, where the National Examination Commission kind of is able to display this information in a way that, shows, regions, shows, equality, but, still systematization of that was not really clear, and how that support comes from the National Statistics Office. Some of the recommendations here, as said by many of these countries, the need, of course, to provide that clear assurance framework, quality data assurance framework to standardize things. This was really, really mentioned very much, by the countries. There's the over-reliance of, support, NGO support, to do some of these things, which is really sporadic, and, as mentioned earlier, this is never enough. So much support here, was really, really key to some of these countries. Some, of course, those laws being a bit outdated, not really updated in the recent times, yet things have been changing in this space, and so some help with being able to do that was mentioned to be very important, so that these laws are updated, so that sharing and alignment of to international standards is really, really upheld. So those are some of the things I see through the information I gathered. Yeah, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Josiah. I think, what I found important about your contribution is that you've looked at how anchored the data systems are in the normative frameworks that exist around discrimination and inequality in the sub-region. And then, of course, also now emphasizing, again, the need for the adoption of international best practices. So thanks for sharing that. The next sub-region that we're going to is Maimuna Ibrahimo. Maimuna covered Mozambique and Cabo Verde. Maimuna, over to you. Can you please share those challenges in your sub-region as well as, some of the good practices that you observed?
Yes, thank you, Isabella. Good morning again. I'll talk about case by case. I only have 2 countries, so I can go deeper for each of them. Let me start by the case of Mozambique, starting to say by saying that that the administrative data has not, in general terms, much been used to produce official statistics. The major data source having been census and surveys. This is because of lack of data coverage, mostly in rural areas, where access to public service has been relatively deficient. And there has not been established mechanism for capturing data produced by alternative service providers. I'm talking about NGOs and community practitioners. Administrative data is, however, produced for administrative purpose, for management purpose by all sectors, except where there are punctual cases where the National Statistics Office intervenes directly, like, for instance, the case of the prisons, the data on the prison system, that our National Statistics Institute goes and picks up the data itself. Data has not been emphasizing for direct discrimination, except for discrimination against women and children. And this is despite the fact that the penal code classifies this type of crime. So the major data we have, Mozambique has, concerns essentially inequality. So what it's being said is that there is only data in terms of direct discrimination in the public sector. The data refers essentially to hate crimes and hate speech, the prevalence by type of bias motivation type of offense, but doesn't have much about perceived prevalence. This is, however, shown in the Ministry of Interior data than in the Ministry of Justice itself. We couldn't find anything. So NGOs have more data on hate and crime and speech, experience of discrimination and harassment. We could find a good practice for Mozambique, that in the Ministry of Interior, it is the Info Violence Project, which is a digital system of data entry and management, unifying all the 4 sectors dealing with the violence, gender-based violence, which is the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. And they have introduced a unique identification number for every case, every case which is shown within the system, especially the one-stop units, one-stop service for support of the violence survivors. So the good thing of it is that the survivor doesn't have to repeat the issue to present their case. The information is captured once and it stays in the system. Unfortunately, it is a system that is operating in 4 provinces only and needs to be expanded to other provinces of the country. On recommendations, well, there is a need to enhance infrastructure development for capturing administrative data. But this is a long way until coverage is 100%, because really access to service has been limited and the country is quite big. Another recommendation is that administrative data on direct discrimination from the Ministry of Justice could be first shown, because they are not showing much of it, but also to be expanded to also show all types of crime. Also, according to age, sex, ethnic groups, location, disability condition, migration status, and then other type of peculiarity. Also, it should cover more reporting sentencing of discrimination, data on attitudes towards minority groups, and information promotion of equality need to be promoted. On indirect discrimination, reports need to enhance discrimination by ethnic groups, disability condition, migration status, and any other type of peculiarity. Most of data currently has been segregated by sex, age, and location. A promotion of digitalization of data entry is a general issue, although there is a need to consider the cost of digitalization, because before it was being introduced, being stored by the National Statistical Office. And now, as we are introducing the cloud systems and their enterprise intermediating data storage, then the costs are high. We don't know yet what the impact will be. Physical infrastructure to support data collection, yes, and also internet connectivity is another issue to be tackled. For the case of Cape Verde, administrative data development is much better as compared to Mozambique. Sectors are basing important statistics in their own administrative data. That's the case of the Ministry of Interior, the Health, and the Ministry of Education. The National Statistics Office works mostly with census and surveys and only use administrative data from the justice sector, mostly in relation to vital statistics. Measurement of discrimination is essentially done by NGOs and the National Human Rights Commission, as well as the Ombudsman Cabinet. And within the public sector, the National Police and the National Institute on Gender Equity and Equality produce data on discrimination, but this has been concerning mostly the gender-based violence. We could not find any information about the Ministry of Justice.
Maimuna,
yes,
sorry, do you mind just wrapping up so that we can go to the next panelist? Thank you.
Yes. There have been those producing data on the direct discrimination. It has been mostly on reporting cases of discrimination, harassment, and hate crimes, but it's not shown in statistics. And there is a very good practice which has been in Cape Verde, is that of Morabi, is an NGO who has been cooperating with the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice sends a template, and it is by law, which Morabi, all NGOs should be replying to, but we only had it for this organization, Morabi, mentioning it. The indicators that can be produced with this data, data template is migrant victim of discrimination and prejudice based on discrimination, number of reported cases of discrimination, harassment, and violence, number of victims of violence, harassment, and violence, unequal treatment of certain immigrant groups. And in terms of recommendation, the recommendations are empower the National Council of Statistics to promote the production and publication of administrative data on discrimination and inequality with strong emphasis on direct discrimination. Include better the parastate and NGOs. Data need to be digitalized by all relevant producers of administrative data. To the extent that not all grounds of discrimination are being covered, data should be expanded to reach all other missing grounds. Enhance capacity of non-official data producers in terms of digitalized data collections, data storage and processing. And they have been asking, please tell Isabella that we need training on gender statistics, because so far they are hiring someone to produce the reports. Improve access to data, both raw and aggregated, report-based, to the public while safeguarding confidentiality issues. The Statistics Office should be operational, easing access to both administrative and census survey data. So far, it's the page is there, but data is not accessible. And they have a project called the Master Data Project that which aims at collecting and compiling administrative data from all relevant entities, but so far it has not been materialized, and that needs to be improved. That's all. Thank you. That's what I would like to share
Thanks
with
a lot,
you.
Maimuna, for sharing
you.
Mozambique and Cabo Verde's highlights.
Mm.
I think the one thing which really struck me is the fact that civil society organizations report to the Ministry of Justice on some issues related to discrimination and unequal treatment, which I think is really a good practice. It's increasingly important for us, especially in these two fields, to bring civil society organizations into our data ecosystems. And so that's indeed a good practice that I think can be highlighted. But let's quickly move to the last panelist, Samuel. If you can please share with us, you covered West and Central Africa. If you can please share with us your main observations, not country specific, you covered quite a lot of countries, of what you feel the biggest gaps are in that region, and also highlight a few case studies of good practice. Over to you, Samuel. If you can please unmute, Samuel.
Yes, I was saying that, as you say, I cover 6 countries, 2 Anglophone countries and 4 Francophone countries in Central and Western Africa. This provides me an opportunity to identify the available and potential administrative data sources that could be used for producing statistics on discrimination and inequality, as well as determine the challenges and gaps in the production and access of these data. As the other participants say, I think there is a cross on these all findings. And the principal one I would say in general in this country is that the data ecosystem here in this country have also a lot of information, data related to some type of discrimination. Even though if they are incomplete, scattered, and so on. But I noticed in general that we have only surveys concerning here gender problems, so as the violence against women, and no survey measuring SDG 16. We noticed that in Francophone countries here, in the decade 2010, 2016, there were a survey covering GPS, government, peace and security, who have some aspect concerning discrimination. But since then, this type of surveys have not been repeated in this country. This is due to finance, and this due also for donors. Donors has retracted for financing this type of data. I will just here to go very quickly, just give 2 examples of some data, particular data I observe in this country, especially in Francophone country. Gabon, for example, have a free anonymous rechargeable lines to support victims. This permits to collect data, information, and also to enhance presence on social media and platforms. This was in Gabon, in the framework of what they call their Gabon Equality Strategy, which which was done by the Ministry of Women and Rights. They set up a telephone number to listen to all victims of violence. And so this type of data can be extracted to have information concerning discrimination and data. The second example is also in Côte d'Ivoire, where the National Human Rights Council have another system disposition to collect, to receive complaints, denunciation relating to the case related to human rights violation. Also there, we can have a basis of information that if they are extracted, if they are compiled, can give more information concerning this statistic on equality, discrimination, and so on. The last is in the total countries. We have a sector like social service in all these countries. We also have some department there do collect complaints for household who come and complain. They are registered. A woman who is not treated very well by his husband can go there and they collect this kind of information. This exists, but they are not also exploited, and they go, as I say, there are specific database I observe in this country, we could help us to have more information concerning this question, these issues. To go before, I will say concerning the gaps. Now, I will say the gaps are those who have been mentioned before, because by other colleagues. But the first one will be here, I mentioned, is the lack of standardization, because concepts are also vary from country to country. It's not the same way to capture the phenomenon. It will be difficult to summarize all these statistics in this country, because in terms of country definition of what is it is, it's not yet the same. The second one I mentioned is the absence of human resources, because this sectorial who can collect this information have not trained personnel. Is everyone who has been recruited in this service who can do it. That means we have to train this personnel, especially at the administrative district, not in central, because in central we can have personnel who are qualified. But as this information are to be collected in the small units also to be aggregated, we need that this personnel must be have a training statistically, have a training concerning, as I said before, the concept, why we call this prevalence of this and those. This needs to be very clear. The third one is financial support. In every country, we have mentioned before, the principal problem was that they have not finance to do this or to do that. And then they have plenty of workload, because statistic action is considered by them as a workload. That is not their work. They say their job is to do this, but when they collect statistics, is an over job, as some say in Nigeria. That means they need support to do that. That is generally the gaps I could mention. Finally, as I said before, that is my conclusion. What can we do to improve the quality of data? As I said before, we have to develop a system to support administrative production of statistics on discrimination. Secondly, we have what we call awareness, sensitization, because many administrations have not this on the framework, especially statistics. We read all statistics framework, but they don't mention this type of statistics in the document. That means also we need to sensitize the Office of Statistics and the importance of these data in terms of attaining the SDG or so 16 and so on.
Oh.
So
Thanks a lot.
have
Samuel, if you can please wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yes, I continue, but as you say, I go on to my recommendation, which are posted their financial resources. As I said, also establish a system to support administration, sectorial administration in producing this type of statistics. And thirdly, raise sensitization awareness to all stakeholders on the collection of and the use of this type of statistics. That is why that is what I can say.
Thanks so much. You know, I think the one thing that you highlighted, which I think is really important, is the fact that this kind of data is collected at administrative points that are far away from the center. And quite often, you know, if the officers collecting the data are not well trained, you have a disconnect, especially in terms of quality of the kind of data that's being produced. You also have some warlords that you spoke about that may not see the importance of providing the data. And so those perspectives, I think, are really important to also bear in mind when we talk to the gaps in administrative data related to discrimination and inequality. So thanks as well for contributing some recommendations. Let's quickly move to the floor. We can now, you have 5 panelists who've presented to you just the highlights of their studies in the 5 sub-regions in Africa. And inviting you to open your video and ask questions, or also just open your mic and ask a question if you have any.
I have a question or a comment.
Over to you, Umar.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you for all the great presentation by our consultant and panelists. I wanted to maybe highlight the fact that so it's a new field of official statistics. Governance statistics has been recognized as a new and important field of official statistics only recently, and through the Praia Group now there are some guidelines and tools to come up with harmonized indicators and questionnaires. So I was wondering what is the next step after this assessment? And also because I'm wondering this because I think one of the way forward will be, for instance, to, as you said earlier, Isabella, to come with a consultative process with the civil society organizations, citizen, NGOs, etc., and then explain and have the same understanding of what is the importance of this governance statistics, whether it's non-discrimination and equality aspects or the participation in political processes. So I was just curious as to what are the next the way forward. Thank you very much.
Okay. No, thanks a lot. Umar, I'm going to just provide a quick response. This data that was collected by our 5 consultants will feed into a module that the Praia City Group is busy developing, which will be guidelines to national statistical offices and other producers of administrative data on how to best collect and also improve the quality of this data. Having said that, at country level, I think your point is extremely important, that it's necessary for the national statistical offices as the coordinators of statistical production to bring these people around the table, the producers of data around discrimination and inequality, and talk to them about standards, about quality, about all the other needs that the study has identified. But I'm also going to give our panelists, I don't see other hands, but I'm also going to give our panelists to just give a brief response to the question from Umar. If you can maybe just in a few words add to what I said. Anybody wants to? Boaza, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you very much for the colleague from GB2. Very important question, especially because for the improvement of these types of administrative data system is very important to, it's one of the recommendations, in fact, that I recommend to enhance or strengthen what we call it, this part of institutional framework. That's mean to enhance the collaboration between producer and user and producer of this kind of data. That's mean to have some platform or some framework when the National Statistical Office with the other institution producing this type of data, with the other owners of this type of data like civil society, to have the time, the place to discuss the importance of producing this type of data, the quality issues, the methodological issues concerning the standardization of this, the concept used, and many things. It's very important to implement that. That's one of the recommendations that have to be implemented if the country wants to develop more their administrative data system for this specific aspect, which is very important. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that contribution. Any other panelists want to respond before we go to the question from Sible, who's raised their hand?
Okay, I can add. At country level, given that like this is something new to the continent, and we are just still in the process of starting. So what the people can do, the stakeholders can do at the country level is to have like a community of practices with all these players who are involved in admin data production at country level, so that at least they can learn from one another and also teach one another on this new way of collecting data. So I think that one can also help at country levels. Thank you.
Thanks for that contribution on communities of practice. Any other panelists?
Yes. Thank you, Isabella. This is Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
Hello. Yes. Thank you so much to the panelists. I listened with the keen interest, but I realized the participants, apart from disability engagement or forums where they collect data, it looks like some of the stakeholders did not feature in the presentation. For example, the national human rights agencies, whether these agencies in various countries have been conducted to provide administrative data, and if so, how was their response with regards to recording this particular data on discrimination and inequality? The other thing is, again, the variables. The presenters talked of disability, which not being comprehensively recorded, but what about other criteria groups, for example, the sex orientation, whether these things have been covered during their assessment, and then the discrimination due to religion and beliefs and gender identity and so on, whether these criteria have also been considered during the assessment, because I heard clearly the data on disability, which was really not properly captured. That's what I want to hear from the presenters, and whether all these stakeholders like these other humanitarian national human rights agencies have also been approached. Thank you. Over to you, Isabella.
Thanks a lot, Dennis. Any panelists would like to respond to this question? So Dennis basically asked about the human rights machinery within the countries.
Yes, I can try to answer or comment to this question. For the case of Mozambique and Cape Verde, there was a role of the National Commission on Human Rights to dealing with these issues of discrimination and inequality. Only that although they have a database, they don't report directly to the statistic office. They report to the parliament. So the need to enhance their position as data provider is important in both countries I've worked with. There is the issue of sexual minority, how to discriminate data, say by sexual groups, sexual minorities, or more other than disability. Well, in Mozambique, there is one organization working on this. We found it. That's Lambda, working with people, it's LGBT community. And in Cape Verde, there were two organizations also who worked with this organization. So for Cape Verde, this data was captured through that system shared with the Ministry of Justice. But in Mozambique, no, this data from NGO is not yet being captured for statistical purpose. But yeah, so it is a framework for countries to learn what exists and what can be done to improve the use of this information to improve the data availability. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that response, Maimuna. Any other panelists want to respond?
Okay, I can add to Maimuna. What I found, yes, the human rights agencies were involved, and I had a very good discussion from representatives from Zimbabwe. But what I found is that like they were just still setting up. They had not yet put most of the things in order, and they were in the process of setting up these processes. And also like just to add on what Maimuna said, you find that they don't, that coordination or cooperation with the NSOs was at the moment is still not there, but they're in the process of doing that. So yes, the human rights agencies were involved in the process. When it comes to these are the, for example, disaggregation past the sex and age, you find that in most of the countries, most of the data collected were mostly disaggregated only by sex and age. So past those two, it was a little bit challenging. So that is why, for example, you find like most of the times we didn't speak more about maybe the religion or the other variables. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Nancy, clarification. So if there's no other panelists who want to continue with this response, I'm going to also give Seble an opportunity to ask her question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry,
Isabella.
Samuel Seble. It seems Samuel also wants to respond. Samuel?
Yes, yeah, concerning this observation, I think in all the countries are covered, the National Human Rights Council was a great actor concerning this data, because as I say, I took two cases in Cameroon and la Côte d'Ivoire. They produce every year a report. And in that report, they mention this type of discrimination concerning sex, concerning land, concerning dispute of land, and so on. I think, but the problem is that they give only the number of these complaints. No detail. That is what is difficult to analyze. See whether, but they have this information, but they have not all the detail and so on. That is what I want to mention here. They have a report. This organization every year reports containing this type of information. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel. I think you made an important point that there may be a need to develop data systems for them so that they can collect more detailed information about these incidents that are reported. So yes, there is work for national statistical officers to begin to work closely with the human rights machinery to improve this kind of data. Josiah, I see that your microphone is unmuted. Did you also want to make a response before Seble asks a question?
I think you make that point, Isabel, very well. For me, is the fact that this is a very new area, and I could see a kind of a gap between the national statistics offices and these, administrators, of this type of information, and many times I saw it, sitting within the ministries and even the national commissions on human rights, because I could see for East Africa that those government affiliated human rights, commissions, they take that name a lot, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, but then there were the, NGO type, not for profit, non-government also, and much of what I saw from this is just a typical kind of organizational type of reports. For example, in Kenya, where it would be a report launched about, killings, for example, that are not justified, and they keep, producing that report, that many times is a dense report, and all they do is call a press conference, and, it's kind of disseminated in that manner. So very limited link between them and, and the national statistics offices, who are the specialists, agencies in this area, and so aligning that, by way of providing some guidelines framework, just like, it came through recommendations, really be great. They're very active, missions, around human rights that we're able to talk to, but that gap is for sure too big. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot for that contribution. I think, you are right about Kenya. It has a very live civil society scene. And yes, there are many opportunities to see how that kind of data can be harvested for official use. But let's quickly just go to Seble. You've been waiting a while for your question, and then we'll have to move on to our presenters. Seble, please ask your question.
Oh, thank you, Isabella, and thank you to the panelists. This is very interesting. So one of my question, already Josiah just responded to it now, but he also spoke about legal frameworks that can be used, that were used. So my question is around, what about government-based discriminations? How do we deal with that? So one of them could be, for instance, affirmative action. So for some it's discrimination, for others it may be equalization. So how, in terms of data capturing, how do we look at this kind of issues? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Any panelists who would like to respond to that question? certain types of affirmative action, for example, we can think of quotas for women in leadership, can be experienced by some, for example, men, as being discriminatory. What would you respond to her question? Any panelists who would like to answer?
Yeah. Yes, that's a tricky one. For me, I saw this as, a big conflict of interest in itself. For example, the Kenya situation, where the law is very clear, the affirmative action, the country is struggling to achieve that for many, many years, even with the nominations, processes, to be able to match that up, and I think the problem has been that, the solution needs to come from the political class and the government itself, which really kind of brings in the conflict of interest. So they're almost not able to do this for themselves, and so only the pressure group side, the human rights organizations that are non-government are the ones who kind of are helping to push that needle, for things like those to be better. But still, they need much more support. And it's clear that, they've all been dependent on donor funding, really, to do that, and that again in itself has limitations. So that's what I see I saw in Kenya a lot. Tanzania, of course, starting to open up in that space as well, the human rights space, maturing up. Uganda, also matured up. Djibouti quite, very early nascent stages with that. Ethiopia was a bit sensitive to this, so I wasn't able to gather much information from there. But to say that, this is, really, none of these countries are there yet, and so efforts are still needed in that area, especially from the non-government agency side, because that's where we're likely to see a lot of results from. Yeah, that's what I'll say.
Thanks a lot, Josiah. Seble, your question segues very well into our next presentation. Fatma Osheva from UNDP Governance Unit will be presenting on data opportunities and challenges regarding representation in public institutions. That is SDG indicator 16.71. And so thanks to all the panelists for your response to the questions, as well as your contributions. We will supply the contact details of the panelists. Boaza, you also want to say something? Over to you.
Yes, exactly, because I saw a question on the chat concerning the case of Morocco from Melissa. I want just to answer very quickly what I already mentioned in my intervention. Concerning Morocco, we say that some of the best practice concerning the collecting and using and producing gender inequality statistics. That's true, because what kind of example we can say for Morocco. I will mention for first of all institutional issue. In Morocco, they have good collaboration between the National Statistical Office, the High Commission of Planning, and the other national institution, the Ministry of Solidarity, the Family, about discussion about this subject and collecting the necessary data to be used for the national report and also at international level within the UN Commission, for example. Also, they have decentralized system. That means they have National Statistical Office and also other institutions involved in the production and the use of this type of data. And specific example, they have a long practice in using administrative data for this purpose. And sharing the data produced via the different ways, especially via publication. As I mentioned, they have specific publication about women in figures, which is published yearly. In this publication, we have all the types of data, especially the data collected via administrative sources. That's what I can say for Morocco very quickly as best practice for this subject. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Boaza. So I want to invite, The panelists, can I also just ask the panelists to, please, you can also respond in writing in the chat.
Okay.
So as more questions come up, please write them in the chat. Our panelists will respond. We'll also provide you with their email details if you want to ask them more specific questions after this event. But unfortunately, we have to move on now, otherwise we'll overshoot our time. Did someone else say they wanted to come in?
Yes, Isabella, I just wanted to say one of the recommendations I had, because I didn't get an opportunity to talk about it, to speak to it. So it adds on to what Josiah was saying on the question that was asked, and also what Josiah also spoke to on governments and the NSOs. So on the recommendation I had was on sensitization. So sensitization on governments and also sensitization on the NSO. Why governments is that because they are the ones who are involved in policy formulation. And then why, and also they are the donors, they're the ones who are supposed to provide the finances. And why on the NSOs? Because NSOs are the ones who are like coordinating these processes and also steering these processes. So that's one of the recommendations I had so as to improve this access and use of admin data in the region, in the continent. Another one I had was on the NSO, because they're the ones who are coordinating and steering. They need to be a friend to these partner organizations who are in admin data ecosystem. With that, if they came up with the solutions, at least it would be easy for the stakeholders in the ecosystem to adopt and also use. Thank you. Those are some of the recommendations I had that I wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks to all the panelists as we segue into the presentations from UNDP. And we'll also share with you the link when these reports are published on the web so that you can look at them in more detail. There's really rich information in there. So we encourage you to follow up once we share. So Fatma Usheva, welcome. I see you have your camera open. You are going to share with us the opportunities and challenges related to SDG indicator 16.7.1. Please go ahead, share your screen. We are very keen to listen to your presentation.
Wonderful. Let me just put it on slideshow. Can you kindly confirm you see? Thumbs up? Yes?
Yes, we can see.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Isabella, and thank you to all the panelists and all the colleagues for really the very useful interventions in this very productive discussion here. Indeed, my presentation is a great segue from the question that Seble posed about affirmative action and government-based discrimination. So far, during our discussion, we talked a lot about discrimination and equality from the side of the victim. Of course, we talked about gender-based violence and other reporting of the population and their experiences of discrimination. But now we're going to look from the other side of the coin a little bit. We're going to be looking at inclusive and representative public service, who are the people working in public service, and that can this tell us something about inequality and perhaps discrimination? And if it cannot explain the entire phenomena, of at least can it signal something? And how can we use administrative data to monitor this changes over time? All right, so in my 15 minutes, I'm going to be talking about an SDG indicator, which is on representation and participation in public service. Maybe not all of you have heard of this indicator, but we all know about it because this indicator tells us about who are the people working in the public sector, in the public service, delivering services to us. So this indicator, in a nutshell, is defined as the representation of various groups. And here we're talking about youth, we're talking about sex, person with disabilities, other population groups that could be relevant in the national context in public institutions at both national and subnational level. Now, public sector is, of course, quite broad, so we need to narrow it down a little bit to know what we are talking about and measuring. So we have, in this indicator, so-called 3 sub-indicators, where we're looking at 3 distinct spheres in the public sector. We're looking at the legislatures, we're looking at the general public service, and separately, we're looking at the judiciary. So in all these three sectors, we'll be looking at who are these people working in public institutions and how they represent the population they're serving. Now, why do we measure representation in public service? I think there's not much of a need to motivate this, but still, it's good to put it out there. Well, simple reason is this is how our population looks. I mean, we're different. We're composed of different, sex, age, ethnic backgrounds, religious background, and so on and so forth. And so if our population is diverse, that means that our public service should also mirror how the population looks like. And the moment public service doesn't really mirror the population that it serves, then there is a problem. And this problem manifests in multiple ways. There is long-standing research on representation of public service and what are the consequences of when public service is not representative or is representative. And what we actually see is that when the public service is representative, people give greater legitimacy to public service and they have higher trust in public institutions. And we know that when there is higher trust in public institutions, then people behave differently when it comes to the government and the public sector. We have more representative public service, we have more inclusive policymaking process, we have higher quality and fairness of policy decisions. And the reverse is true, of course. If we don't have representative institutions, basically everything down the line is not representative, fair, and equal. I guess the same we can say of why we're looking at representation in the judiciary. Exactly the same argument. We have a diverse population, and our judiciary, which is the decision-making authority in a country, the rule of law, where people go to seek justice whenever they have dispute, should basically reflect the diversity of the population. And again, a long research and well-established research shows us that when judiciaries are perceived to exclude certain groups, individuals from these groups are less willing to turn into courts because you have less trust in the system. And so what we know, of course, is that diversity in these judicial positions renders decision-making that is more responsive and more legitimate. So this is why we're looking into this indicator so closely. Now, very in a nutshell, we're not going into the nitty-gritty of calculating this, but just to say that what we are taking as indicator is we're looking for the proportion of women, proportion of youth, proportion of disabled people, depending on the group you would like to cover across the public service, and you divide that by the proportion of that group in the working age population. So it's not enough that I say there's 50-50% women in certain public institution or 50-50 disabled people with disability, people without disability. So we're looking at what is the proportion of those people in the population, and is the proportion in public service of those people very similar. So we're looking for that in public service, in the judiciary, among women, youth, discrimination, disability, and so on and so forth. So if our indicator says 0, it means there's no representation at all. That group doesn't appear in public service. 1 is the ideal, equal representation. Below 1 means that the group is underrepresented in public service, and above 1 means that that group is overrepresented. And you're going to see in a second why am I saying this, and keep this 0, 1, above and below 1 in mind when I present some results to you of how this looks like across the world. Now, this is a community of practice on administrative data, or we're addressing administrative data today. So I'm sure you can already start getting an idea of, hey, why is this relevant for administrative data records? How can we use administrative data records to measure representative and inclusive public sector? So the aim, of course, as with any data collection, is to collect data that will basically respond to our research question, or we'll measure the phenomena we would like to measure in the most cost-efficient way with the highest data accuracy. For these particular indicators, we've seen that surveys, of course, are a possible source of data. However, they are produced on a less regular basis, a bit costly, of course, and they're not really focused on public service or judiciary, which introduces a little bit of a bias, and we often miss the required level of disaggregation, right? So we have this general disaggregation by sex most of the time, but the rest is missing. Now, population censuses are much better at doing the job of measuring this accurately. However, population censuses happen every 10 years, and that is not enough. We need a higher frequency in order to monitor progress in this area. And that is why administrative records seem to satisfy all these criteria of what we need as data in order to produce robust and reliable and timely data on representation and inclusiveness in public service. They're very up to date, of course. I mean, disaggregation should be easily available for certain groups, and I'm writing should be because we discussed that in many countries they're not. And administrative records, of course, they have this great quality of timeliness. Now, when it comes to public service, administrative records that are used are usually from human resources and employment records. And these are more accurately recorded for be it social security or health insurance purposes. So the data coverage of this indicator is a little bit better in comparison to, for example, what was discussed, discrimination or reporting of violence or harassment and so on and so forth. So what we have currently is data on women in public service across the world. We have data from 126 countries in the period 2015-2022. And you can see here I have indicated Sub-Saharan Africa and Western Asia and Northern Africa, the data availability. So we have relatively, it's not ideal. We still have to aim to reach this 100%. But we have a rather good base to start working with. And in the judiciary, unfortunately, the data coverage is a little bit lower. We only have 78 countries with data that tell us the proportion of women in the judiciary. And Sub-Saharan Africa here scores much, much lower, with only 9% of countries reporting on this indicator. And then we also have Western Asia, Northern Africa at 52%. Just to say that these are the M49 standard SDG regional disaggregations. That's why they look, they're grouped like this. Now, okay, let's just go a little bit into the findings and what can this administrative data in this indicator tell us about possible discrimination or inequality. Now, women in public service, what we see in the global estimates is that the ratio is 0.8. And recall what I was telling you of above 1, below 1. A ratio of 0.8 means that women are underrepresented in public service across the world. It's a global average based on 126 countries. Northern America and Europe, they score fairly well because they're a little bit overrepresented. Women are a little bit overrepresented. But when it comes to all the other regions, we see underrepresentation of women in public service. Now, if we regroup these regions and we actually take the income level instead, there is a quite stark difference here we see. In high income countries, we have reached parity, so to speak, of a ratio of 1.06, whereas low-income countries are really falling behind. Again, this is based on 126 countries, which is a rather good data coverage. Now, what is the challenge? Of course, the first thing that may come to your mind, especially when it comes to discrimination and inequality, is, well, these results do not tell us anything about the distribution of decision-making power. Women can be overrepresented in certain regions, but is that enough information to tell us something about gender inequality within the public service? That's why this indicator collects information also by occupation. And this is where the importance of this disaggregated data comes into play. Because what you can see from the data is that women are overrepresented actually in low-level positions. They're overrepresented in general in keyboard clerks positions and administration professionals. The higher up we go, the less women there we find, especially in senior government and managerial positions, right? So this can already indicate something about what is happening in the public sector system. Is there a glass ceiling for women, or perhaps there's something else going on? All right. Similar, we also look, of course, of women in the judiciary, and our global estimates show that there is less than parity, so women are underrepresented in the judiciary. But again, what is very important to look at is these disaggregations by the level of court, which is the position women take. So we see that in constitutional Supreme Courts, women are underrepresented, and they're overrepresented in low-level courts, right? What are the opportunities and challenges? I think we've discussed a lot in the past 1 hour about opportunities, challenges, but specifically, of course, to this type of indicator, and when we think about representation, inclusiveness in public service, admin data shows really great potential to monitor this on a timely manner, in a very cost-effective manner. And what it also gives us, administrative records, is this longitudinal analysis. Data is produced every single year, so we can monitor changes in a very comprehensive and consistent way. Now, the thing is that admin data, and that has to be very, of course, clear, cannot substitute surveys or other data sources for certain topics or areas. So we observe that women are underrepresented, but what prevents them going up is perhaps a survey can answer that question, a survey within public institutions with public sector workers, where you can ask what are their perceptions, what are their behaviors, and what drives those behaviors. So there should be a careful evaluation of the different data sources and the data accuracy that data source produces. Of course, as a challenges, we also see the data privacy and confidentiality, integration, IT infrastructure, data integration difficulties. Of course, I already mentioned very specific scope of information. Public sector service are needed to understand the challenges employees are facing. Lack of standardization across regions, ministries, etc., etc. I just wanted to tell you that we're soon making our annual call for data that will come out in October 2024 for the year 2023 and before, and we'll be publishing our new statistics in 2025, and we would really like to increase this data coverage to 100%. So this is just a small appeal, of course. If you have any relevant data or you want to discuss further, please get in touch with us. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And please shout out if you have any questions.
Thanks a lot for that, Fatma. I would like to open the floor for questions. Alternatively, you're welcome to post.
Yeah, I have a question. I really apologize because I have a hard time accessing the chat and also the raising hand in my keyboard.
Okay, so no problem. Over to you for a question, Umar.
Merci, Isabella. Fatma, thank you very much for this insightful presentation. I really liked it, and I wanted to share some insight from Djibouti and with regards to women representation, for example, in the judiciary system. So every year or 2 years, I'm not really sure, the Ministry of Gender in Djibouti publishes conducts an assessment. It's not an assessment, but they look at the representation of women across different government structures. And one of the interesting highlights from that exercise is that in Djibouti, for instance, the maybe 90% of judges are women, and women are very represented in the judiciary system. So, and of course, we are very interested in participating in this exercise that you in the next round of exercise that you might be doing. So, the question that I had was, for example, in other sectors of the government, for instance, I work a lot with the Ministry of Interior and for migration statistics and displacement statistics, and there you have women in uniforms, and sometimes when we discuss informally, I learned that some of them, very competent and very dedicated women, don't benefit from the same advantages as their male counterparts. They are not given promotion, for instance. They are not, sometimes they are, yeah. And when I discussed that and I asked why, did you take any steps to tell the government, or because there is a national women association organization that fights for the right of women, they don't go and see the right government structures that might challenge these discriminations. So I was interested in your presentation and wanted to ask you if what you think about that. And yeah, I totally agree with you. A survey or more qualitative things will be more interesting. And also, in addition to the production of this kind of data and indicators, I think maybe putting the emphasis on communication, communicating these figures and communicating towards the government, towards a larger public, I think will help overcome these structural challenges that women may face. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Omar. Maybe, Isabella, if I can take a second to just answer to Omar. Very interesting, the study you're mentioning about Djibouti. If you have a link, please do share in the chat. We'll be very happy to take a look. The story you said about the women in uniform in Ministry of Interior and the promotion or not benefiting fully in the same way as their male counterparts. I mean, these are stories that we hear quite often. And of course, what are the drivers of that is something that has to be investigated. There is the women are not given a promotion, or women don't ask for a promotion. So there's this too, because you're afraid to ask too much, and these social norms that come into play. So I agree with you, and I'm glad you agree with us that more surveys, be it qualitative or quantitative surveys, are needed in order to really understand what's going on and what is driving these behaviors from both sides. Yeah. So, and thank you for the tip on communication. Indeed, this is something we have to all work together with the NSOs to kind of keep raising awareness of these results with governments and counterparts in order to reach parity at some point. So thank you. Maybe I can just add that, I mean, I presented results only on women because this is the data we have available. As you also discussed a lot, disaggregated data based on disability or based on other ethnic groups or religious groups or gender or age is very scarce. So it's also something we're working towards, improving the data availability in these areas. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Fatma. I think if there are more questions, Samuel, you want to make an observation, and then we'll ask you to just respond in the chat to questions. Samuel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for Fatma for this presentation. I have only a concern in the indicator, the denominator. What is the woman age you consider there? The age of woman in working group.
Working age.
And that is, age. Does it have a variation? Sometimes considering the rural sector, the urban, the the continent or so on, because this it can vary as.
Indeed, there are challenges. With that. But for example, we don't have data disaggregated by urban and rural. And I understand basically your point is that the denominator, it's proportion of women in the working age population, and this varies between urban and rural.
Yes.
I mean, Samuel, in the name of time, maybe we can take this in the chat. I can send you a message and response on this in the chat, because I know that other colleagues, just to be time cautious of this. That's all right?
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks, Samuel, for your question, and Fatma for your presentation. I think, you know, you highlighted once more that there are quite a lot of data gaps when it comes to this specific indicator, and it's sourced from administrative data. And that's one of the reasons why the Praia City Group felt it necessary to develop the handbook on statistical best practices related to governance. And we have, firstly, Jose Eduardo da Silva, who's going to give us a very good overview, a short, brief overview of what the Praia City Group is all about. And he's then going to introduce our next speaker, Shadia, who's going to really explain to you how the Praia City Group is trying to overcome these gaps that we've identified through our study, as well as the gaps that were just highlighted as well by Fatma. So thank you for your presentation, Fatma. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you, Isabella. Hi, everyone. We know that time is running, so I'll do a quick presentation on what is the Praia Group, global and generally, and what we are doing at the moment, but it will be really, really quick, okay? So the Praia Group on Governance Statistics was created in 2015 by UN Statistical Commission, and is led since by the NSAV, it's the Cabo Verde Statistical Office. Well, we have a mandate that is running five years. The first mandate was 2015-2020. The output we published in 2020, the handbook on governance statistics, and in this handbook, we identified 8 dimensions of governance. Now we are running our second term from 2020 to 2025. And during this second term, since we have the responsibility to produce and create instruments, methodologies for the 8 dimensions that we identified in the handbook, we create 2 dedicated task teams to advance the methodologies on the 2 of the dimensions. The 2 of these dimensions we are working on at the moment is non-discrimination and equality and political participation. Since we are speaking on the non-discrimination issue, the task team on non-discrimination is led by 2 NSOs, Peru and Finland, and is supported by UNDP and OHCHR. The main outputs that the task teams are working on, it's firstly a harmonized survey model on discrimination that we are working on the moment. The idea is to enable to produce comprehensive and survey-based statistics on discrimination. And at the moment, the survey model is being tested by NSOs around the world. We did last year a phase of cognitive testing, and now we are doing pilot testing. The other output is a guidance of the use of administrative data for the production of statistics on discrimination and equality. On this guidance, of course, we will have recommendations on data recording and comparability practice, quality assurance, data sharing, connection with other source, calculation of indicators, At the moment, we have a consultant that's sponsored by OHCHR that is working on this first draft of this guidance. Hopefully, we'll have it on November this year. At the moment, also on the products we are working on, hopefully next year we will have a global consultation by UNSC of these two instruments. And after the global consultation, we will submit these revised products to the Statistical Commission for approval on 2026. I will present now the consultant that is working on the guidance. She's working with the Praia Group under the sponsorship of OHCHR. And her name is Shadia Rask, but I will let her present quickly herself and go through her presentation, okay? Please, Shadia.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation to present at this meeting. And very quickly, I will share the slides in presenter mode. And if someone can kindly say if it looks correct.
Looks great.
Great. All right. So my name is Shadia Rask. Greetings from Finland. And I will be sharing briefly on the international guidance for utilizing administrative data to produce statistics on non-discrimination and equality. And I've had the privilege and pleasure of working on this since last spring as a consultant. So basically, the main purpose of this global guidance is ultimately to eliminate discrimination and reduce inequality by supporting NSOs on the collection and use of administrative data on non-discrimination and equality. So the primary target audience are NSOs, but also other data producers and users. And thank you very much to the panel and also Fatma for the presentation and the discussion, and really many of the concerns that were raised and the need for guidance is really reflected in the purpose of this guidance and work. So the key concepts in this guidance, they are non-discrimination and equality on the one hand, and on the other hand, administrative data. And there's been a lot of work already in this field, and we're drawing in the key concepts on the definitions already published in the Praia Handbook on Governance Statistics, and also from 2011, the UN Handbook on Using Administrative Data and secondary sources for official statistics. And in terms of administrative data, in this guidance, we're drawing on a wider definition of administrative data. So not only looking at data from government institutions, but also more widely from the private sector and civil society. And an important work I want to mention here that we've been drawing on is the guidelines on how to improve the collection and use of equality data published by the EC subgroup on equality data. A very brief overview based on already the first revision of the draft.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't see you in presentation mode.
Oh.
And if you are changing your slides, I'm also not seeing them change. Now I can see changes, but it's still just in work mode rather than presentation mode.
Thank you for letting me know. From my screen, it looks like presenter mode, and I'm already on slide 4. I wonder, is it now showing the slide titled Key Administrative Data Sources?
Yes, it's showing that one, but it's still just showing in normal PowerPoint rather than presenter mode.
How about now? on my screen, it looks like the presenter mode, but
no, but in the
no.
interest of time, I think just continue because
Yes, okay.
We are a bit time poor.
Yes, thank you. My apologies for the technical problem. But very briefly, the core content of the guidance, there will be guidance on many of the challenges that have been raised today also. So looking at the advantages and limitations of using administrative data, guidance on compliance with, for example, the fundamental principles of official statistics and the human rights-based approach to data. There's content related to the current state of data collection and the problems related to data disaggregation by the different prohibited grounds of discrimination, and really focusing on the NSO's role and how to foster collaboration between different stakeholders. And then maybe the most important part of the guidance will be the illustrative indicators at the end of the guidance. And we're drawing on the international human rights normative framework. So the indicators, we're looking for structural, process, and outcome indicators that look at the different attributes. So equality before the law and protection of person, direct and indirect discrimination by public and private actors, nullifying or impairing access to adequate standard of living, health, or education, and also equality of livelihood opportunities. And then fourth, the special measures, including participation in decision making. And we've been looking for national, regional, and international examples. This is a long list and the font is small, but just to showcase that we want to and have been inviting storylines and good practices from different institutional settings and countries. And thank you so much for the work of the Praia Group and UN Women on this study on administrative data systems in Africa. We're drawing on this study both on the regional level and then also for some specific case examples. But as I mentioned, a key part of this work is the illustrative indicators that we've been trying to map. So it began with a desktop review, focusing first on SDG indicators, measurable using administrative data, and relevant for non-discrimination and equality. I've been reviewing the metadata. And we've been trying to select a core indicator list that would include at least one indicator per indicator type, so structural, process, or outcome, at least one per the attributes of the right to non-discrimination and equality, which I introduced in the framework, and then at least one per key domains of life, so education, work, living standards, health, justice, personal security, and participation. And based on this work, together with the OHCHR, we've proposed a core list of 8 administrative data indicators and 2 which perhaps are non-admin indicators but could be complemented with admin data. And currently we've been having discussions with relevant focal points and stakeholders. And as Jose introduced, my part in this project will be to put together the second revision of the draft by mid-November. And at this point, the core indicator list that we've been looking at includes these 8 SDGs. So proportion of population covered by social protection floors and systems, maternal mortality ratio, parity indices for education, whether or not legal frameworks are in place to promote, enforce, and monitor equality and non-discrimination, proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments and local governments. And thank you, Fatma, for introducing 16.7.1. This is also an indicator that we've been considering. And then the three last admin indicators include the average hourly earnings, victims of intentional homicide, and the national human rights institutions. And then the two non-admin indicators that we're considering are the proportion of violence against women, and also proportion of self-reported discrimination or harassment. And to wrap up, so as I mentioned, we've had really great discussions with the focal points of the SDGs, but if there are those of you listening who would like to participate or comment or collaborate with us, I invite you to reach out to me, and my email is on the slide, for any suggestions or resources that could be relevant to be included in this kind of a global guidance. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share.
Thanks a lot, Shadia. This work that you're doing is really extremely important. We've heard from our consultants that one of the problems is standardization and adoption of international best practices. So your work is going to really support that. I'm going to open the floor for one live question, and then would like to encourage all of you to post your questions in the chat. Shadia will respond there. Anybody would like to do a live question? Doesn't look like that. So let's then, thanks a lot, Shadia. Let's then move across to our next presenter, who is also from UNDP, Mariana Neves, the UNDP Governance Statistics Specialist. Welcome, Mariana. You are going to share with us the findings of the second Global Progress Report on SDG 16. And Mariana actually also used to work for Cabo Verde National Statistical Office, so she is very familiar with the Praia City Group. In fact, they were the founding members. Over to you, Mariana.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Can you see it in the presenter view?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And South Africa, so Isabel was supporting us as South Africa when created the Praia. That was a long time ago when I had much less white hair, but time has passed. And today I'm very happy to speak about the SDGs, and I'll speak a little bit about the report and what we're seeing in the report, but also trying to link with the administrative records. The SDG 16 as the discrimination participation, it's a new domain. It's a very new domain of statistics. And unlike more mature domains of statistics, maybe let's say labor statistics, we're still developing and we're still trying to create. How should we create? So in some cases we have some answers, and in some cases we are still seeking the answers. So there's where it comes from the Praia Group, for instance, where there are domains that we're still trying to understand how to move forward. But the indicator themselves is a domain that we already know more or less how to move forward. So this is a very bad slide, I must say, because there's a lot of text, there's a lot of information, maybe too much information. But the reason I'm placing this slide is exactly for you to see. We have, looks like only 24 indicators. It seems very little, but it's not little. And we have this very important indicators already mentioned below, the proportion of population reported to have a person who felt discriminated. This is at the end. We have the indicator of participation, that's 16.7.1. And we have all of these actors on your right side, which are the custodian agencies, where the several agencies, depending on their expertise, on the line of work or their experience, they are responsible or they try to coordinate. For each of those, we have different systems. And the way we work with the administrative records is very different. One, because of the thematic itself. So Fatima, she actually sits just in front of me, she's just next door. What she presented, we are using mostly human resources indicator. This is a specific administrative record we're using. But if we go to 1611, which is also administrative records, now we're using internal affairs records, we're using administrative justice records. The sources are as varied as it is the number of agencies because of the several reasons. But regardless of this diversity, we were in 2014 when we started designing the indicator, we were in a very, very early stage. And if I might say, at some point, SDG 16 was the indicator, the goal that we had the least amount of data. Today, this is extra information extracted 20th September 2024, so just a few days ago. We are not among the best, but we are not among the worst as well. So 16 that we see, and you see here, I hope you see my cursor. We are now at 50% of countries with some data. For Africa, what we have at this point is 44.2 for Sub-Saharan Africa and 41.9 for Western Africa and Northern Africa, Western Asia and Northern Africa. So it has increased considerably from the near zero at the start. But the indicators are not behaving at the same way, and we don't have the same data availability for all indicators. So the column that you see now on your right side, you see each indicator. I wanted to put the labels, but it would be impossible to read. So you might have to go back and forth between the previous slide and the current slide. But what I want to show you, that everywhere that you see a correct sign are administrative record or another type of records. And all that don't have are survey-based records. So we have 1611, which is administrative record indicator, which is at 75.6% globally, is a very good. We have 1661 that it is a administrative record, but it's based on budget. It is at 82.4%. You have the National Human Rights Institute. This is a very different type of indicator. They are at the 100%. And we have the survey-based indicators in several stages of development, some a little bit higher, some a little bit lower. This to say that not always the survey-based indicator will be the fastest. Sometimes the administrative record is the fastest, and because we have a certain information. The fact that we have this data availability allowed us, and when I say us throughout this presentation, is UNDP, UNODC, and OSHR. So the three agencies have several activities from some time ago trying to harmonize and trying to compile, trying to agree to, trying to increase advocacy around the SDG indicators. And for these specific indicators, we also have most of the custodians. You'll see it's a long list, so I'll ask you to go through the report to actually see every one of the other agencies. And also we have all of NSOs that have provided the data. So what we see today, the main, and is in the middle, is the one that Fatima has presented. We have the women representation in public service, and we have a very dire situation with 0.39, which is very underrepresented. But you also have other indicators like the birth registration that is a mixed indicator. I'm sorry, I forgot to say something very important. Here we have 1671 and 69 ones are two indicators. They are mixed because they come both from household surveys and administrative records. 69.1 is an extremely important indicator, and we see now that 1 in 5 children under the age of 5 do not have their birth registered. This is a major impediment for us to be represented as to exist in the system and be able to be seen in the system. And we have 1 in 6 people have experienced discrimination. This is the indicator you see. This is a survey-based indicator. And you have person with disability when you're now going to not at the level indicator, but trying to segregate, then we see that person with disability faces discrimination nearly twice as frequently as those without disabilities. So these are several levels of data that we have, and with several levels also of of detail. One point that I saw throughout the presentation, also that it was excellently reported by the consultants, is that it's not one or the other. We need both of them. So, for instance, if I can go to the indicator presented by Fatma, 1671, this is the record indicator. So we just see the capacity, the individuals that are in the system, and this is crucial because if you have a public service that's purely male, it's different than you have a public service that is mixed. So it is a very, very crucial indicator. But we also need the other side. The fact that they are there does not mean that they believe they're participating. It does not mean that they're actually having the system is responsive or it is inclusive. So we need that very important survey-based indicator. This is just one example. And we have several other examples throughout the SDG framework that we always need to go through different parts to understand. Another indicator that is very relevant to try to do this is the indicators on victimization. These are UNODC. UNODC is the main custodian, so they have the main expertise around this. But you have the survey-based indicator. They will tell you the experience of victimization. This is also relevant for discrimination indicator. And then we need the indicator actually what is coming to the system. This is not an SDG indicator, but when you're analyzing at country level, you need the data administrative record as well. So yes, how many do we have? People who are victim physical violence, and how many are actually being reported? So the two cannot be dissociated. If we go to another domain, and this is the SDG, and it's still the report, we have another part, very important part of being presented in the report, where we have statistical and financial flows, and it continues to be a very serious problem, although we don't have the precise number because we have very little amount of countries. Again, this is a call for, we need to produce more of this. We have detected victims of human trafficking. This is mainly on, and the word here is detected, is mainly on the administrative records. The administrative record in this case is much more efficient because we're talking about a very hidden population. This is another UNODC indicator. So we should have this, but this is UNODC, someday we'll tell you more. But at this point, what we have is most of the administrative record. Then we have the special case of bribery, where we have the SDG indicator. This is a very, very important indicator. It's a survey-based indicator that we have in the framework. But this, the indicators and a lot of other work help to push the discussion to, okay, just the survey-based indicator is clearly insufficient. We need the other side. So where you see the wheel is the survey-based indicator, but then you see, for us to assess, this is according to this framework on measurement of corruption, for us to assess bribery, we need all of these other indicators. So you see, for instance, and I put it here, you have the prevalence, yes, but you have the, you have the criminalization of bribery, you have the e-government, we have other important parts that we need to consider. Lastly, is on what we call the part more related to the peace component of the SDGs, where we have the victimization on one side that you see on the right side, then we have the conflict-related deaths on the other side. These are two very, very different systems of records, being, as I said before, the homicide coming from various sources, mainly administrative records. The civilian armed deaths coming from a combined sources, but our OSHR colleagues are very best to explain exactly at level of detail how they're collecting. But the base here is that although there are two non-survey indicators, how we are collecting it is very, very different. And this is because of the specificities of the countries that we're talking on a conflict-affected country, that we might not have a statistical functioning system. And even if functioning, it might not be performing at this normal pace. And we have the homicide that it is collected in all types of situations. So my colleague Fatma already was brilliant in doing what are the constraints and what are she summarized very well at the end. What I wanted to share with colleagues today, as I conclude, is a set of instruments that you already have and help us harmonize the statistics. So a big challenge that we have with the administrative records is that when we're trying to compile, the administrative records are created without, sometimes, without considering the statistical component. So they are created for a specific purpose. And this specific purpose sometimes is very different from what we need at statistical level. So this is an increased reason that we need the harmonization and try to have this alignment between the statistical side and what we need for statistics and the system that is producing these administrative records. One example, or we can have several examples, but one very simple example is sex. The way we collect sex is different between countries. In some cases, we are collecting male-female. In some cases, we are collecting male-female intersex. If this was only the difference, that would be okay. But if we go to try to collect gender, then it's completely different. But even still, on this too, we might have for, let's say that we're going to try public service. Ministry A is collecting female-male. Ministry B is not collecting sex. Minister C is collecting only female. And then for us to try to harmonize this, it becomes a very big challenge. And this is just gender, and this is the simplest indicator. If you go urban-rural, in some cases, the urban rural, what we call urban and what we call rural varies greatly between countries. Or with what we call of certain offenses. We have how we are collecting, if we're trying to do the chain for crime statistics, for instance, we need the harmonization of how it's collected in the public service, in the prosecution, in the police, in the prison. So all of this big system, even if we're thinking of only one single system, this harmonization, this standardization is really key for us to be able. And lastly, before I said we here, UNODC, or OSHR, UNDP, the three agencies, each have their own statistical units, and all of them are very eager to always discuss with anyone who wants to know more or the standard, or to know or see how the system can be improved, or just ask a very specific question. The email that we see at the end is my email, but if you have any questions related to the other agencies that have worked on this report, please direct it to us and we'll direct it to any relevant agency. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Appreciate your contribution and the very rich information, and as well the progress that we've made. 10 years ago, very few countries were able to report on any of these SDG 16 indicators. And so, yes, there are still a lot of data gaps, but it's very encouraging to see. And thank you to you and the other partner agencies who've worked so hard to get this off the ground. I'm conscious that we are running late, but I'm going to go to 15:15 of the hour. If there's anyone who wants to ask a question to Mariana, you're most welcome to open your mic and speak. We will, in my email summarizing this event, I will supply the email addresses again of both the panelists and all the speakers. If you want to follow up and ask them any questions subsequently, you're most welcome to contact them. But anybody who has a burning question at this moment? So I'm not seeing any takers. So once again, thanks a lot, panelists, presenters. It was a great session, and I really hope that we can contribute towards making this kind of data more reliable and more readily available and accessible. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll meet again in a few months' time. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.